Hi guys, it's Minx here, and I am joined by, of course, by Lutin,
Hello.
and we are back for another episode of MLD. Today's topic isn't. We're going to talk about violence and censorship and just generally adult content in video games because it's something that's really interesting. It's something that's really changed over the years. Well, we originally sort of thought about this because of the presence of hatred on Steam is imminent, and we thought we'd just talk about how violence through video games has progressed, situations where censorship has taken place in video games, and just have a general chat this week. I think is a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to know where to start with this because it's such a kind of massive area of there's so many different ways you can approach it. I guess let's start, like you say, with the hatred thing. I mean, to be quite honest, it's just the first in a long list of titles which could be considered shocking. You know, you go back to stuff like Manhunt, and of course, everybody has already seen people going like, "It's just like Postal, it's just like Postal," and it's like, okay, you look back at games like Postal and that, and you're just like, man, it's a terrible game. And I think
Exactly.
that's where hatred hinges on the most. I mean, I actually, when it first came out, and this is the point, it did exactly. I feel so stupid for letting it push my buttons, but it did. Like when I first saw it, you know, it's like it's designed, it's purely designed to cause outrage. And 2015 is surely the year of outrage. You know, where people just can't wait to be foaming at the mouth over things. It's just that everyone is so offended these days about everything. And I have to say, I've been trying to like relax myself a bit because I've realised I'm getting caught up by this crap, and it's like it's just so unnecessary. But the game is designed to frustrate. You know, it's designed to make people upset. You know, when the guy is like, you know, he reads this absurd spiel. It's so cheesy, like, and it's just, you know, it's like out of every school shooting you've ever seen. You know, and then there's like the bit where this girl's crying or woman's crying on the floor, and he's got a gun in her mouth, and then she's going, please no, and then he kills her anyway, and you're like, oh my god, that's so terrible. And it's just like, just they're pushing buttons. But like a lot of people said in the comments, I was really pleased to see a lot of people going like, this is just like a clickbait shock game. I mean, when you actually look at what you're doing in the game, boring, dull, 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 dull. It's like, unless you're like turned on or super excited by this kind of shit, you'll just be bored out of your mind in like 10 minutes. You know, it's going to be a worthless game basically.
I don't know. I guess I might slightly disagree with you here.
No.
Maybe. I feel that for a start, I do think obviously that hatred has a right to exist. For those of you who don't know, by the way, just to recap,
Oh
hatred
yeah.
is like a spree kill simulation game. Is probably the
Yeah.
best way of putting it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you were a spree killer in a realistic setting, and you go and kill lots of people, and presumably you're killed by the police or kill yourself by the end or something like that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think that's the general gist of it. I don't know all the ins and outs. I mean, I do think it has a right to exist, and I do think it has a right not to be censored. I would say that.
Oh, can I throw in one key thing here? From what I
Sure.
saw, they seem to all be unarmed civilians. I don't know whether you have any gun battles versus police, but from what I saw, you're mostly just walking around slaughtering innocent, like, well, I say innocent, who knows if they're innocent, but like unarmed people. I think that's key, you know, because it doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be any real challenge against you, you know. So
Yeah. I mean, the whole point is to kill unarmed, innocent people, and you're filled with hatred, I guess, and you've gone out and done these terrible things. Um, I don't necessarily think it will necessarily be fun. It's certainly, like you say, designed to shock, and it's designed to be clickbait, and it's designed to draw people in to play it. It's like, oh my god, look at this! It's so. But that said, while this is just a further evolution of doing this, lots of games have done this over the years, and lots of games can be, I would say, adjusted as guilty as this game. It's just that this is the latest evolution of
yeah,
what's shocking to us. Like you could even argue that the original Grand Theft Auto
yeah, it really
had
was
a
when you
lot of
think
stuff
about
like
it.
that.
Yeah.
Like I remember running over the monks and
Yes.
things like that, and
They would
I
drag
don't
their
know, like
bodies along the ground and leave like giant red scars where you'd sort of ran over them, and you could
exactly.
360 slide your car into pedestrians, and it'd be like just like
It was
blood
great.
everywhere. You know,
It was absolutely great as well.
it's
I mean,
hilarious.
Carmageddon I don't know if you guys know, but in this country, in the UK, Carmageddon was actually banned, and they were forced to change the pedestrians to zombies in order for it to get an actual rating to be released here. It's
Yeah.
one of only two
Oh yeah, I
games to
remember
get
that.
banned here.
Yeah, I remember
The
that.
second one is Manhunt 2, which was also banned. In fact, Manhunt 2, I think even in the US was censored. Like both versions were
Yeah.
censored.
Here's the crux of the whole thing, in my opinion. It's like people really get hung up on this stuff, especially in the media, because they see like a level of violence and you enacting that violence in the game, and quite often people, you're kind of getting entertained by it. I mean, there's many games where your sole objective is to slaughter other targets, whether they're supposed to be bad or whatever. It doesn't really matter. You're still just basically killing people endlessly. And there's so many games. I sometimes looked at my game collection. I'm like, damn it, man! Like, there's not that many games which don't involve me slaughtering other things in this game, right? But here's the thing: is that I often find myself, you're laughing a lot of the time. You're like, oh my God, look what happened to that guy. You're like absolutely wetting yourself in laughter as to some things that can happen. And here's the thing: humans are we are wired strangely. I mean, think about in film and in television. What do people love more than anything else? They love a good murder. They love murder and like things like this, drama, all that kind of stuff happening. And people love like chaotic bloodbath horror films as well. I mean, I went I don't know, 6 months ago maybe, I went to cinema in London. Me and my friends went to see Brain Dead, and I've seen it a few times before. But it's one of these it's like a slightly older cinema, And if you don't know Brain Dead, it's basically a Peter Jackson film. It's just a horrific nightmare of zombie killing.
I know the film.
Yeah. But here's the thing: it's super cheesy and it's so stupid. Like, it's insane. It's so stupid. And so it's got like a kung fu priest and stuff, and he ends up he's like, I kick ass for the Lord, and he's like an amazing character. But there's a bit in the film where the main character gets a lawnmower and just walks around a room like shredding zombies, and there's blood everywhere.
And people enjoy this. Like,
people in the cinema were like laughing. The whole cinema is literally wetting themselves laughing. And it's like, that's the thing. Humans have an innate ability to associate what is real and what is not real, and understand the kind of absurdness of the situation, the insanity of the situation. Whereas on the news lately, like even this week in London and stuff, you'll hear about somebody get killed. Like, I'll read it in the paper coming home, and you will literally feel sick. You're like, that is fucking terrible, because you understand the difference, and that's the key point.
Difference. Yeah. But for example, I just posted a video on my channel where me and a few friends tied a guy up in Reign of Kings, dragged him across the landscape at the end of a rope while he begged for his life, and then hung him. We lynched him and he went along. To be fair, he was a good sport and he went along with it. And
he was a good sport about it. Okay, well,
he was playing up to the fact of what we were doing. He was going along with it. But in general, though, like, and I find like watching videos like that. For example, my friend Kiwo, she often does like horrific shit in her videos to people in video games, and it's amazing. Like, it's really entertaining, and as humans, we do, like you say, have the ability to differentiate. But I feel that that's often forgotten by the media.
Yeah. They just seem to see it very black and white, It's like,
exactly. They'll take this game hatred and be like, God, everyone who plays this is gonna become a spree killer. Every single person who does this is gonna go and shoot up their mall or whatever. And I sound so American. Shoot up their mall, and just generally, they're gonna claim that this. And if anyone who plays this game ever does do that, it's the game's fault, according to the media, which of course is bollocks. Because in my opinion, there are obviously always going to be crazy people out there. There are going to be people who get a real life thrill from killing, or people who are just just sick in the head or whatever, who can't differentiate between reality and fantasy. But that is a minority. It's an incredibly small minority of humans, and we can't censor society and censor the world purely because of a deranged minority. We really can't. And it's like an incredibly small minority, like a teeny tiny amount, and we can't stop creativity, or even you can't even stop. Even if you don't think it's creative hatred, for example, you can't even stop mindless clickbait because it has a right to exist, and you can't censor it because of people, getting uptight about this kind of stuff. You really can't.
So we're going to talk about though also. Because we could give innumerate examples of where there are violence in games. I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about how interestingly violence has changed from slightly more older retro games that you and me would have played like 20 years ago to where we are now. I actually find that there's a curious lack of sort of not necessarily violence, but gratuity. There's less
gore.
Kind of blood and gore, yeah. I mean, so people know that I'm a big Battlefield player, and Battlefield is quite classic in that it doesn't really have a lot of gore. It's quite sterile in many ways. I mean, even when you knife someone, you run up to the guy, knife in the chest, he pulls it out, but it's clean as a whistle. It's absolutely shining gold when it comes out of the guy, and there's no blood at all. So it's a very kind of static, almost, I would say almost like target dummy. It's like, I put you down, but there's no blood and stuff. Whereas you look at something like COD World at War, which came out a few years ago now, and that obviously had the kind of ragdolling stuff in there with the fully destructible bodies, where you would shoot a guy with a sniper rifle and bam, his leg would just fly off and there's fucking blood everywhere. So again, kind of difference in how games have changed. Also, you go back to stuff like Mortal Kombat, where the insane moves where you're like literally ripping people's spines out and stuff. I'll tell you, the only one that I can think of lately that was particularly bad was Killzone 3. Killzone 3 had some pretty brutal melee kills in that. The worst one people remember is in Killzone 3, when you want to take a guy down, you grab their head with a melee and literally put both thumbs through his visor and into his eye sockets, and then just throw him down on the floor. And I remember, like, everyone was like, Jesus, man, that's pretty full on. But overall, a lot of games don't have so much, really gratuitous violence in. But there's just a lot of actual killing in games. One that I remember that really kind of it irritated me actually was Tomb Raider, the latest Tomb Raider, 2013 it was, I think, and that game's really fun, really enjoyable, really nice environment, pretty good story. But I was just like, I got about 50% through, like halfway through. I was just like, oh god, really? Like, more guys to kill? Okay, ping, 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 ping. Let's get through this area. It was just like irritating almost, and actually a few of my subscribers kind of commented saying, like, what would you think about this game if it had no killing, if it was literally like an exploration archaeological game where Lara's kind of wandering around, maybe she has some dangerous things she has to take on or whatever, but overall
traps
it's
and things like that.
Yeah, but it doesn't involve you coming to an area and be like, and here's another 20 guys you got to take out. It's like, and it really, for someone who's played a lot of games, it's like, oh, for Christ's sake, yeah, here he is, ping, got him, on to the next one, ping, got him. It's like boring as hell. It wasn't really scary or threatening in any way.
I would say that violence these days actually is a lot more matter of fact.
Yeah, totally.
Like, for example, so I used to be obsessed with like gore. I used to like be like, wow, this game's got gore, I'm totally gonna buy it. Gibbs, great. Like, I remember playing Quake, and I used to spend hours just used to go around with cheats on and gibbing things and watching their chunks and trying to find their head and going, hee hee hee, there's the head on the floor, sort of thing. When I was a kid, obviously I had issues. I still do. And but like Soldier of Fortune is another one. That game was actually really, really heavily criticized when it came out for the level of violence, and especially as you could like shoot innocent civilians and stuff. And in that game, I remember like it had like the big selling point where it had real, I wouldn't say realistic, but it had like breaking points on the body, so you could shoot individual legs off. You could physically shoot someone's face off the front of their face. You could blow their brains out and have their brain drop out, and their skull would be empty and like twitching around and shit like that. And it was really, really violent. And I thought it was great. I thought it was hilarious. I used to play that just again and again and again to see what horrible things I could do to people.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I was also fascinated by the fact that bodies would stay behind in things like Quake 2 on the PC. In fact, that was always a big selling point for me from PC over consoles. I remember bodies staying behind in Quake 2, flies gathering around, and then I used to think, whoa, this is so cool, bodies staying behind? Wow. And these days, that never happens. Like, we've moved away from that. Like, in fact, like I say, the violence is now sort of like, let's take Call of Duty, for example, a game series where you kill thousands of people. It's like, butter, they're dead, they fall over, body vanishes within seconds, done, sort of thing, you know what I mean? And it's almost very much like, yeah, this is just how it is. Like, it almost trivializes it in a way, if that makes sense. In some ways, I think, while it's not as gory, it approaches the violence in a much more sort of like, violence is okay sort of way, you know what I mean? And
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. I was just going to say that, like, it is, and it depends on which FPS you look at. If you look at something like COD and Battlefield, I think the reason that it does trivialize it, like you say, is because you're back up so fast. It's seconds, and you're back up and you're into the game. So therefore, it has almost zero consequence to you, So it's just kind of like, take him down. Whereas if you look at something like Armor, which I also play, in Armor, and I mean, you play it, but in a different way to me. But we, yeah, like a polar different way to me. But no, when you look at something like Armor, when we play it, and we play it kind of, as a tactical military game, you often have to go great distances. You have to travel like 15 minutes to get to where you're going, right? And then when you get there, if you get shot and there's no medic, you've got to go all the way back to base and travel there all over again. So there is actually a huge... So sometimes, like when we're in game and suddenly we start taking fire, and I have some mods for the sound which make it loud and much more realistic. You start taking a bit of fire, and it's like, holy crap! Like everyone's like, get on the deck. You really throw yourself to the ground because you don't want to spend 20 minutes getting back to there. Now, again, that still trivializes it in comparison to real life, but at least there's more of a consequence there, and you think a little bit more about your sort of mortality in the game, and it's sort of worth sort of throwing that comparison, I suppose.
I just find it interesting how, as times progress, like gore in particular has become. I mean, obviously, there's occasionally gory games that come out. I'm actually trying to think of any, and I can't really think of any recent. I mean, obviously, Mortal Kombat still comes out and shit like that, but in general, I can't think of many recent games.
That game on the Wii where it was like Splatterhouse or something, something like that. Yeah. And you just, but even that wasn't. That was very. That was artistically stylistic. It was like black and white and red.
That was fun. You could like throw people into blenders and shit like
that.
Yeah.
I'm trying they're few and far between.
They're few and far between.
It used to be kind of like a core thing. I mean, especially 90s games and stuff. I mean, you think like back to like Doom, and remember
Doom and Quake and Soldier of Fortune and all those sort of like Unreal. In fact, Unreal and like those engines of games, like the early, like the sort of like I guess the Revolution, even Half-Life, the original.
I was about to say that. Like when you think about the railgun and you just like just shred people into like pieces all over the place and stuff. So. Yeah, it could be pretty nasty. But more than anything, like especially like you talk about hatred, but it kind of reminds me of that first scene that was so controversial in Modern Warfare 2 when you come into the airport, and it was so widely covered in the mainstream media about this, where you basically come into the airport and you're supposed to be part of this kind of terrorist cell or whatever. That was the whole kind of principle of the campaign in that game. You come into the airport and you have like a light machine gun, fully automatic, and you come into the airport and you just literally start cutting people down. And it was supposed to be so controversial, and it was all in the news. And when I picked up the game, I was like, man, this sounds pretty full on. I wonder what it's going to be like. And you start it up, and it's got all these warnings, and it's like, you may not want to skip this section, and warning this and that. You might find it disturbing. And I was thinking, wow, this is going to be something pretty amazing, right? Get into the game, and it's like... And after literally about 2 seconds, I was like... God alive, like, and it wouldn't let you run or anything, so you had to walk. So you had to basically just walk through this level, just cutting people down. And I was just going like, oh, for Christ's sake, I wish I had skipped it because I'm bored out of my mind. I just want to get to the actual gameplay, And I think that's really the thing, is that with a lot of these things, they're just tedious and dull. It's not shocking because you are not stupid. You understand they're not real people, and so you get turned off by it very quickly because there's no challenge, there's no excitement there. It's just dull,
Mm-hmm. I would say that it's very rare that violence is hard hitting anymore. I think of very few examples where I play a game, and I feel that in order for violence to be hard hitting these days, the game needs to be cinematic and to be telling a story, and you have to have that emotional connection. Like, for example, not to do huge spoilers, but The Last of Us, for example, a certain scene where a certain character loses their temper a lot with another character that's doing something bad to them, and that's really grim. That's really, really, really like, oh my, like I was like, whoa. I mean, I was glad the character got what was coming to him, but at the same time, I was like, whoa, like holy fucking shit. This is, that's intense.
And
you know what I mean?
You know why that was? Do you know why that was so shocking? Because it walked that line that was more reality. You could see the more emotion, and you could understand the reality of the situation, and therefore it wasn't like absurd and insane and just ridiculous. It was more grounded, more realistic. You really had empathy for the characters because you felt so connected to them through the game itself anyway, and that's really why that sort of sequence there connected with people so hard, I think. And that's it. It worked. That's obviously what they wanted, so it did exactly right.
It's a phenomenal game, actually. Really, really good. But yes, another thing I wanted to touch on, moving slightly away from violence, because I also wanted to talk just about adult content in general, and I wanted your opinion on this. And I'm pretty sure that you're not an aficionado of pornographic games, for example, but Steam recently, I would say over the lot, obviously Steam's become a lot more loose in what it allows on, as of late. And recently there's been an emergence of, maybe I wouldn't say like full on like proper games where you actually have graphic sex, but certainly more eroticized content.
I know, I've seen them all on your channel.
But you know what I mean? There's been. What do you feel? Do you feel that Steam should have allowed these on? Do you feel that Steam, like, because with the announcement of Hatred, it means that Steam is technically selling an adults only rated game.
To be quite honest, there's no real reason why that shouldn't happen. I mean, there's a lot of games that are on Steam already which do have age ratings for other reasons. I think, but like with the violence, it's this curious thing of like, where do you draw the line? And actually, people are way more oversensitive about sexuality stuff than they are, and especially in the US compared to the EU. Way more concerned about kind of sexual elements than they are violent ones, which I always find curious, especially when you consider, like, I always never understood this one, that like, in the UK, for example, I believe the age of consent in the UK is like 16, but you have to be 18 to be allowed to watch pornography. And I'm like, so you can have sex but not watch sex? Like, what's up with that? And
you can't watch someone else have sex, but you can have sex with somebody else,
like, all you want.
Without,
it's like
as long as you're not looking at somebody else do it. If it's a threesome, you could be in trouble because you're watching someone else have it. Then
it's just, but so this disparity, you see,
and then it's ridiculous.
And so like when it comes to the violence thing, people seem totally okay with quite extreme levels of violence, but sex, whoa, what, it's like it's too much for people. And like, I find it absurd that even like those which was the one that actually did get or was it Twitch wouldn't allow the game? Which one was that recently?
So Twitch banned anyone from streaming Honey Pop, even the censored version from. I
have to say, I mean, we watched, me and my girlfriend, we watched it, and it was just like laughing. It was so funny. It was just like an amazing game, super funny. Didn't want to play it myself because it didn't look like something I would enjoy really, but the mechanics of it. But it was just like, it was a silly game. It was a hilarious game.
I quite enjoyed it, I must admit. I mean, it wasn't deep or anything, but it was fun. I had quite fun with it.
But then, okay, where do you draw the line? And here's the thing: is like, is there any line to be drawn for violence or sex? Now, for example, there's the classic, the one that's just always sort of stigmatized, I suppose, but like rape play. In my opinion, not a particularly pleasant game. It's pretty awful. And for anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of like an anime style, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I would say it's anime style. Yeah.
Yeah, and you basically, it's the name is quite explanatory. Should that game be allowed? I wouldn't imagine that would get on Steam anytime soon.
No, it wouldn't.
It's like, but these games exist. It's like,
I'm pretty sure there's laws in a lot of countries outside of Japan that would prevent games like that being released.
Exactly.
In general.
Exactly.
And it's where there has to be a line. Like I saw.
But my point is, my point. Sorry, no, definitely come in. But my point, I just wanted to say on that is, like you say, there's laws that would say this game is obscene and therefore not allowed. Well, how is that less obscene than you putting a gun into a crying person's mouth and blowing their head off?
That's true.
How is that less?
That is true.
And so, like, where do you draw? And so people say, well, this has a right to exist, blah blah blah. Well, technically, yes, but if you're going to have, like, surely, just where do you draw the line? Either is it all acceptable, is it not? Like, where do you draw that line? Myself personally, I think that something like hatred will be very boring. I particularly don't really want to see it. And I would say if you're going to outlaw some games like, rape play and things like this, which are, in my opinion as well, obscene and not something that is particularly constructive or positive for anybody to play, then I don't think something like hatred would be either. But then again, we come back to what we were saying about before, where humans have the ability to differentiate. So it's a complicated thing, isn't it?
It is a really difficult thing. The question of where do you draw the line really is. It's nowhere near as black and white as a lot of people, especially the mainstream media, would have you think it is. And I don't even know where I draw the line. I'm against censorship, but at the same time, I do feel uncomfortable about certain things being in games. So.
I mean, now I've started to think about it more. I really am like super confused about this. It's like, we were saying before that, you can differentiate as a person between what is real and what's not. And that's why, crashing a fuel tanker into a load of cars in Grand Theft Auto and all the people running out on fire going, ah, you're like, oh my God, look at these explosions everywhere, right? But, if you did that in real life, it wouldn't be so funny, But then again, if you have something like rape play, where you're kind of tying up a character and then sort of sexually torturing them, and it's like, okay, that's pretty fucked up, but, you would very much hope that the person doing that can draw that line between reality and fantasy. And therefore, if you're going to allow violence in one way, surely that same model applies. I mean, it might be distasteful to you, but it's like, I'm just finding it hard to kind of, like, my initial argument, I'm kind of like going, it doesn't really
there's,
make
cer-
sense. You know.
there's certainly a point I'd like to make. In Japan, okay, let's take Japan as an example here because it's one of the few countries I know the laws on.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so in Japan, games that portray sexual assault are acceptable. Games where you actively engage in sexual assault are seen as acceptable. In fact, they are purchased as part of the media. Maybe not the mainstream media, but there certainly is a market for them that a large number of people will indulge in, because otherwise there wouldn't be a market. Um, Also, games where you have underage sex are legal in Japan. Sex with minors. And does that mean the country has a larger percentage of sexual assault on minors or sexual assault I don't think it does. And I'm not saying that I think those things should be allowed, but does it make people do those things? I mean, the evidence would indicate probably not, but at the same time, does it encourage it sort of like in society and make it more acceptable? Then perhaps, and maybe that's reason in well, that it's in my mind that is reason enough to
It's
not allow those things. But it's
yeah.
it's still it's still very odd and a very I don't know. It's a very
You
hard
basically,
subject. Yeah.
I remember reading an article which said, specifically with the case of what you're talking about in Japan, that in some respect they allow these things to enable people who maybe have problems to have an outlet rather than live those things out in real life. I think there was also a counter article which I read, that basically people may engage in these kind of fantasy activities, and that it could then heighten their needs to actually want that in
Yeah.
reality. So you can look at it from two different points of view.
I guess it must depend on the individual,
Yeah, and that's
perhaps.
really what it kind of comes back to with everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this is why you have certification boards and things like this, because they are kind of, I guess, usually government sort of regulated things which decide, okay, where are we
Exactly.
going to say this
Exactly.
is not or not, and you kind of don't get to choose. On the other hand, there's many, many cases where games, movies, things that have been banned and outlawed, it's like being a child and having something taken away. You don't go, oh really? Oh, that's unfortunate. It's clearly something I was just never meant to have. No, you are like, for God's sake, I want that. I want it now. And you will literally do anything to get it because it's
Exactly.
been told you can't have it. Oh, it's just a minefield of stuff, isn't it, really? I mean,
I can't reach a conclusion on this topic because there's certain things that I feel shouldn't be allowed, but at the same time, like at the same time, I am against censorship at my core, but I feel there has to be a line, and
okay.
I guess in my mind I have that line that I am comfortable with, but should a line apply to everyone? I don't know, and it's just horrible. I feel genuinely uncomfortable thinking about it on like a more like a deep level because I don't want things on Steam for I know that it's not going to happen, but say for example, Steam suddenly was like, well, we're going to just do we're going to sell everything. There's certainly things I wouldn't like to be on Steam.
Yeah.
Um, you know what I mean? And one thing I actually saw, like for example, there's another game I played recently that has an adult version. I played the Steam version, which is censored. And there were like people on the forums going, "Oh, I really want to get hold of the adult version of this sort of thing." And one of the replies was, "Well, you can't have it on Steam because kids use Steam." I was like, "That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous argument because
You could
like
get around
kids."
that easy anyway.
And yeah, and also it's a ridiculous argument because you can get around it anyway, and there's and hatreds on Steam where you blow people's fucking brains out
I mean,
as
it's
they
very, it's
beg for
very,
mercy.
yeah,
You make in the trailer he makes the girl like deep throat a gun and then
yeah,
blows out the back of her skull as she cries for her life.
yeah, yeah. I mean, they could make it as well. I mean, but you see, you can never gaming is a weird thing as well because you can never get around the fact that kids are going
It's
to
a
play
game.
games. Well,
Oh
no, I
yeah,
was going to say kids can play games which are basically totally inappropriate for them. It always seems to
exactly.
be the case. I mean, I know I did when I was younger.
Yeah, same here.
You
I
know,
played Grand Theft Auto when I was 11. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
and it's like parents buy it for their kids, and then the kids, I mean, I sometimes look at games and I'm like, man, that's. I tell you one thing though, is that when you and me were maybe like between the ages of 10 to 15 years old, the kind of realism in the brutality of stuff in games that we would have played is markedly different than it is
yes,
now, and I wonder whether that is a significant difference,
that
because it makes
is.
it more difficult for you to differentiate between the two, apart from, I suppose, the fact that you're sitting in a comfy chair holding a controller. But, I don't know whether that's anything to consider.
I think
And
standards change though with time, and we have to allow that. But at the same time, like when I was a kid, for example, I remember being at a friend's house and they were like, "Hey, guess what I've got?" I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Resident Evil 2. It's rated 15." I was like, "Oh my god, this is let's play it, let's play it." And they're like, "Yeah, don't tell my mum though," sort of thing. And we were both too young to be playing Resident Evil 2, and we were like, "Wow, it's got blood!" And "Oh my god, what's that thing with its tongue on the roof? You shot it with a shotgun. There's blood. Oh my god!" And like it was like and now in the same situation, like, "Hey, I just got hatred. I just burst into a school and shot 50 kids in the head." Yeah, you know what I mean? Like there's a
Yeah,
marked difference. You're right. I'm
yeah.
not sure. By the way, just to record, I'm not sure hatred actually has killing of kids. I just use that as a point of reference.
So I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, really, I hate using the term "end of the day," but I use it too much. But anyway, still, at the end of the day, there are always going to be different opinions about anything like this, and I suppose this is just one of those things where the opinion happens to have a more significant impact than just whether or not you like it. I mean, we've seen games lately which have come out and been unpopular or popular, and they either die or succeed for one. I mean, like we talked about in previous episodes, you have stuff like Goat Simulator. On the premise of it, an absurdly stupid game, a clickbait stylish game almost in many respects, yet very, very popular. So it's kind of like, therefore, people's opinions you can't help, but that people seem to really like a game which many people would consider totally stupid. Take that to the side and you go down this path, well, you're still having an opinion, and lots of people have very different opinions about what which side they come down on here. The only difference is that those opinions could have more of a significant actual impact on whether or not the game is available than just whether or not it's popular. But it's one of those things where there is no real easy answer. There isn't. I mean, I can't say definitively this is, because it's fictional. That's the trouble. It's fictional. And it's like, I suppose you could say it's like some of these things are perverse, but, but then so are a lot of films, and so is a lot of television, and it's like some films and some television things have left me feeling particularly unwell. Come away thinking like, man, that was pretty hardcore. Like, I felt very bad. I mean, war stuff, it doesn't have to be like crazy gore violence. I've seen some very, very nasty war films. I was watching one in Vietnam, and this wasn't even a new film. It was like in the 70s, 80s film maybe, and it's like these guys get hit by napalm, and this one bloke's there, and you sort of you've been enjoying this guy in the film. He gets hit by napalm, and then like his leg's there, and some nurse comes to like help him with his leg, and his whole leg almost disintegrates, and you're like, fuck me, that's not pleasant, and it's like, so you can be shocked by things. It doesn't have to just be games. It's like, where do you really draw that line? And I don't know, it's very, very difficult.
I'm glad it's not my responsibility, because I would just be overwhelmed basically.
And I think as well is that nobody will ever be happy with this. There's always going to be people that are unhappy, whatever side it comes down on.
There's always going to be people campaigning for like the extremes to be allowed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm sure there are people on various Steam forums advocating to the type of stuff that we talked about being legal in Japan being allowed on Steam. I'm sure.
I mean, the trouble is that you have to have some level of decency and acceptability. You just have to. You can't have a situation where everything is completely legal. Because imagine what the world would be like if just everything was completely legal. It would be absolutely absurd. There has to be laws and rules and things in life to keep everything structured and working properly. You can't. This is the point as well, is that you unfortunately, we would love to live in a world where you can just trust people to live responsibly and behave and respect other people. But as we see on a daily basis, this is 100% not the case. However, a lot of those rules and stuff apply to people's real actions. So when you get into the world of fictional things, how does that apply? Oh, it's super complicated. I've literally got no solid answer for this. I can't even come up with any kind of outgoing conclusion, which I think maybe says more about this whole topic than anything else. I think maybe our conclusion for this one is going to be that we have no conclusion, and that we literally pass it over to you guys to discuss in the comments, of which I will be fascinated to read, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd really like to read some of the stuff you guys have to say on this. So, yeah, I guess we'll wrap this up. We hope you enjoyed this episode of MLD. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we're always happy to take them. We're going to, obviously, I've been really busy lately. We're going to try and get going with more of these in the weeks and months to come. So, we'll see you really soon.
Yep. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now.